Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Printed and Painted: The Meiji Art of Ogata Gekko by Amy Rigla Newland. This book features beautiful prints from Meiji era Japan with a special focus on the artist Ogata Gekko, but many other artists are included as well. But first of all, if you are new here, welcome. I post new book reviews almost every single day on both fiction and non-fiction books, so if you want to wake up in the morning and get your daily dose of book reviews and reading suggestions, feel free to stick around. This book, as mentioned and implied by the title, really features art from this Meiji era, but the book also has a focus on Ogata Gekko, and the book can do this because this artist lifespan almost neatly falls into the era that the Meiji time frame falls into as well. So Meiji Japan was a time of great change. There's a lot of things changing in Japanese society. We had the restoration of imperial rule. We had some reduction in feudalism. There was industrialization. There were educational reforms. There was some increasing imperialistic aims, such as a war that was fought on the Korean Peninsula, and there was an increase in Western influence in society. So through all of this, the artist Gekko, or Ogata Gekko, was living, was painting, was creating these traditional Japanese prints and observing the society around him. And because he lived through this era of great change and this transitional period from tradition to a more modern Japan, he was able to create a wide variety of prints that represented the world around him. And his prints feature both traditional subjects that I've seen in other books that I've read on Japanese woodblock printing. For example, there's some emphasis on beauties. There's the floating world, there is landscape, there are the traditional views of Mount Fuji, but then there's also, during this time, prints that feature nationalistic pride or feature items like women riding bicycles or things that indicate a more Western influence on the society that was being observed during this era. So this book, the contents of this book are primarily artworks by Ogata Gekko, but they also include relevant art by people who were his peers, people who also lived during this time or who painted subjects that are related to works that Gekko was also painting. They also include some of his students and works by his wife, who is also an artist. So it's not solely prints by him, but they are primarily prints by him and by people in his peer group during this era of Japan. So the prints are divided into contents, and the contents are divided into like categories. So we have history, legends, and samurai tales. So that's all in one section, and I think that's really where there's a lot of focus on tradition. We also have beauties, manners, and customs as a whole section. Next, we have the natural world, landscape, and the city, and I think that content section was my favorite. We have literary leanings and the theater, and then we have modern wars, modern soldiers, which kind of focuses more on that imperialistic and expansionist idea or aim that Japan was having during this time. So, and all of this is accompanied by text. So there's the prints, the artwork for you to look at, there's description about the artwork, but then there's relevant historical and biographical details around it, including information from the artist's life, the historical events or the current contemporary events that were influencing this artwork, things to know in the artwork, or information about the artist who had done that work if the artist wasn't Ogata Gekko himself. So the focus being on Ogata Gekko and divided into these categories, I think we can now dive into some of my favorite pieces of art. I have been loving these Japanese print books. It's a style of art that I've always enjoyed, but I think the more I read about it, the more the style grows on me, which is just a very pleasant and fun experience to have. So I'm just going to show you some pieces of art in here that I enjoyed particularly. Starting with, and I will say the page number in case you have this book at home or think about purchasing this book, you can follow along and look at the pieces yourself. We're going to start with the print on page 64, and this is in the Beauties, Manners, and Customs section. Just kidding. It was not 64. I wrote the page down wrong. It's 69. This is a winter scene, so we have two women who are walking through a winter scene. This is what the print looks like, and I think that this style of print really captures the winter scene, the like muffled, quiet beauty of a fresh snowfall. For anyone who lives in an area that receives regular snow, there's that feeling you get when you open your front door, you go out into your yard, it's dark, the snow is falling, and everything seems to have this muffled, quiet quality to it. And I think that these Japanese prints, and not just Gekko's work, but a number of other artists have also managed to capture that quiet snowfall feeling in a way that I can't think off the top of my head of an artist that came out of, say, Europe or America who's captured that quite the same to me. Of course, I'm probably wrong. There's a wide variety of artists who came from the European continent and North America, so someone has captured it, but I just really like the style that these Japanese prints are in. This artwork, this piece of art was by Gekko, and it's called Reclining Dragon Plum Trees at Kamaido. The next one on page 72 just features the cherry blossoms. This is something that comes up a lot in Japanese woodblock prints and also haiku. So it's something also I would like to see in Japan. I would love to travel to Japan and see. I just think that the cherry prints, the cherry blossoms in this print are particularly pretty, kind of focus on springtime. I do prefer prints of like winter time, but the springtime is very pretty with that focus on cherry blossoms. Next, we have page 87, and this was something that was only mentioned briefly, and I'll explain in a minute why. Fan prints. So some of these artists, and Gekko is not the only artist who did this, designed prints that were put on these fans that people use to make it through the summer, to cool themselves down. But because these art pieces were going on inherently disposable fans that were going to be used and then used up because they were going to be destroyed, a lot of the artwork doesn't survive from these fans, which is a little bit of a tragedy. The art was, though, designed to go on these fans. They weren't designed to be sitting on a wall for someone to observe or for someone to purchase as a print, as a souvenir. They were designed to be on this consumable good. But there are some pieces of art that were never mounted to the fan. They just never made it that far, that were preserved, and these can be found on page 87. I know it's very difficult to find these pieces of work by any artist. So the fact that they have a couple featured in this book is, in my opinion, interesting and cool. On page 88, we have a piece of art that I really liked looking at, and I liked the, I guess I can say, subtlety of the artist. This is called a water's reflection, and at first glance, it just features a woman who is reclining in the outdoors, and there's a reflecting pool below her, but the article on the right tells you to look at the water, and you can see in the water's reflection is the reflection of a fox showing her true nature. This is a fox spirit, and this actually is a tie-in to the Japanese yokai and other supernatural beings by, I believe, Andreas Marx. I do have the review of that book on the channel. I feel like the more you know about the mythology and the traditions and the folklore and the mythology of Japan, the more you can appreciate some of these prints because you see all those little things. The little blurb over here does call it out and explain that to you, but I have to say, when I first looked at this photo, I did not notice the print reflection in the pool, so I think that's just a cool feature. The landscape section has to be my favorite section, or the natural world landscapes and the city. This is what this section beginning looks like. And I mean, almost every one in here is just absolutely beautiful. So these are pages 111, 112, 114, 116, 117, 123, 125, 126. I mean, at a certain point, I can just stop writing these page numbers down because almost all of these were my favorite. I just like all of them. And these are the kind of things that they seem very simple, but they're very, I don't know, they just kind of speak to me. And I just recommend getting a copy of this book yourself and not just taking my word for it, but taking the time to sit down and look at all of these prints yourself. Did we show these? I'm not sure. On page 123 is another winter scene. Again, I just like the way it looks. I feel like it conveys that subtle, quiet, muffled quality of fresh snow that I just really enjoy. So I liked this one particularly. It's another winter scene like the one with the two women walking. I mean, almost every page in this chapter had artwork that I just really, really liked. This was easily my favorite section. I do have to say my least favorite section in this book was probably the theater section. I feel like it either needed more commentary or I was just missing some necessary cultural background. But I felt like the print to text ratio did not balance well, at least in my personal opinion, from the theater section. And I think that the landscape section was my favorite and the strongest. Page 128 and 129 feature works by the artist Kyosai, so not Gekko, not the main artist who's featured in this section, but they're prints of crows, and they were just very striking. When you see them, they just seem to pop off the page, and I love them. I just really thought those pages called to me. When I turned the page, it was like the crows just popped out. Something about, I don't know if it's the coloring that's used, the glossy black. I mean, if you see a crow up close in real life, you realize kind of how pretty they are. So I really liked these three prints, or these two prints, I should say. There's three crows featured. One of them is two crows on a plum branch set against a setting sun, and the other is crow on a pine branch in the snow. Again, I like both of these. They're done by the artist Kawanabe Kyosai. And then we have this print, which features a ruined Shinto temple. There's the relevant information on this page, but here's two prints of the same scene. The section that kind of alludes to more of the imperialistic and expansionist aims of the Japanese empire at this time, I guess you could say, is this modern wars and modern soldiers section. So unlike a lot of the other books I've checked out of the library and read on Japanese woodblock prints or art from is it the Edo period that's before the Meiji? The period that follows or precedes the Meiji period here. I do not recall seeing a lot of stuff that featured national heroes, battles being fought that were contemporary battles. So historical fights between samurai or featuring historical themes were present, but something that featured a battle that happened very recently that was almost promoting nationalistic pride and heroes who had fallen in not defense, but in service to Japan was not something that I had seen a whole lot of before. And there's a whole section here which I feel like speaks to that aim of Japan at this time, and it's just a very unique section. A lot of these are by Gekko, but there's also many by other artists. And I mean torpedoes. Torpedoes are not something I don't think I've seen featured in other woodblock prints before reading this book. So I think that was just a really interesting section, and that chapter really solidifies the fact that we're in a transitional period for Japanese history, moving from maybe this more what we think of like this tradition to a more what we would recognize as modern Japan, or Japan in the 20th and 21st century. So printed and painted, the Meiji art of Ogata Gekko. Overall, this is a very good collection of prints. I've already told you my favorites and shown you some of my favorites. It shows Meiji era Japan very well, and I really appreciated that this artist shined a spotlight particularly on Gekko as an artist. He's not as well known in the West as some other artists, so I'm glad that we have this book by him. I'm glad that, not by him, but about him. I'm glad we have all these prints, and I think this is very interesting to either someone who enjoys history or someone who enjoys Japanese woodblock prints or someone just looking to enjoy some good art. All three of those people would probably be interested in picking up a copy of Printed and Painted and giving it a read. If you have any thoughts or comments on this book, please let me know in the comment section down below. I love to receive it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest